I have been trying to come up with a few words to explain the woman who is coming on now. And having heard her many times and had the pleasure of sharing the stage before, I have to say visionary and practical, bold and beautiful. So get ready for a treat. Marianne Williamson over the years has said to us over and over that we can expand our consciousness all we want to, but at some point we got to apply what we've learned from expanding our consciousness, okay? And so that's who's coming out here to talk to you now. Marianne Williamson is an internationally acclaimed spiritual author and lecturer. 6 of her 11 books have been New York Times bestsellers, and 4 of these have been #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list. She's been a popular guest on television programs such as Oprah, Larry King Live, Good Morning America, and Charlie Rose. She is founder of the Project Angel Food, a program that serves over 1,000 homebound people with AIDS and the Department of Peace campaign. She's on the board of RESULTS, Results Organization, working to end the worst ravages of hunger and poverty throughout the world. Prepare to be grounded. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello. Thank you so much. Thank you. It is an absolute honor to be here. IONS has been at the forefront of a movement over the last few years, a movement which used to seem a little bit fringe, and now you're fringe if you don't know what's going on in this field. And that's because of organizations like IONS and the people who work with it. So I'm honored to be here, and I thank you. This shift in consciousness has now become, as I just said, a mainstream movement. And so now it's time to take the conversation to the next level. I think that the era of data collection is over. We have collected the data. Part of the profundity of the work of organizations like IONS is that they have taken on the task of verifying to the scientific community a lot of what the ancient wisdom has been saying for a very, very long time. Everybody comes into this field from a different place. Some people need the verification through the mind, some people need verification through the heart, and ultimately all of us need verification through experience. But the fact that we have now reached a point where there is such a collection of data, taking this conversation to the next place, which has to do with application and also has to do with the ethical and moral questions which have already been mentioned today, seems to me extremely important. I saw a movie called Ex Machina. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie. It's quite popular now. I see it in hotel rooms and airplanes and so forth. If you haven't seen it, I hope that you do, because it really posits a very significant question at this time about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has been mentioned here today, and not only it, but what it represents as a larger question, I think, is extremely important. We all know the phrase Deus ex machina, but the name of this movie, very aptly, is Ex Machina, without the Deus. What are we talking about here? We're talking about the evolution of consciousness without love. We're talking about the evolution of consciousness without conscience. We are talking about the evolution of consciousness without a sense of moral and ethical responsibility, as though, oh, that's easy. No, it's not. And I want to talk for a moment about what the Course in Miracles talks about as the difference between magic and miracles. Magic is where you use the powers, whether it's the powers of the outer world or the powers of consciousness. On a certain level, it does not matter. But magic is where you use these tools to get what you want. Miracles is where you say to a universal flow of love, how can I serve what you want? Magic is where you basically see the forces of consciousness. Magic is where you basically see the forces of consciousness as your errand boy. Miracles is where you see yourself as a servant of love. Now, it's very interesting because the mind is so powerful that just as in the absence of light there is darkness, in the absence of love there is fear. And just as love builds on itself and is constantly moving and is intentional, so is fear. But the mind is so empowered by God, by whomever, by whatever. The mind is so powerful that when it does not serve love, it serves fear. So this whole conversation around consciousness must not be kept neutral. Nor should we consider it easy. Oh, well, of course we will use it for love. Fear, ego, consciousness not serving love does not announce itself as what it is. Your ego, that loveless part of the mind, doesn't come up to us and say, hi, I'm your self-hatred. Doesn't say, hi, I'm here to sabotage just about everything that you touch. It doesn't say, hi, I'm here to attract other people with whom we can do some real damage on this planet. That's not what it says. It says, hi, I'm with you 100%. We're going to go out there and get what you want so you can be a winner. Let's look at the body for a moment. You have an egg and you have a sperm, and they come together, and then these miraculous phenomena appear. And cells emerge with this natural intelligence. And this natural intelligence leads every cell to go where it needs to go. Some forms brain, some form lungs, some form heart, some form fingers, some form toes, some form hair, some form skin. And through this natural intelligence, by whatever name we give it, the cells know to then collaborate with other cells in order to serve the healthy functioning of the whole, the collaboration with other cells. But sometimes in the body, as we know, a cell disconnects from its natural intelligence and instead says, hey, I want to go off and do my own thing. I'm tired of just serving the pancreas. I don't want to spend my whole life serving the liver. I'm not here to serve. I want to do my own thing. Wants to go off and build its own kingdom, and it attracts to itself cells as diseased as it is. And what do we call that? Cancer. And what has happened to human consciousness is that a spiritual malignancy has set in. And that spiritual malignancy is the idea that I'm just here for me. And that spiritual malignancy is the idea that all the world is the playground just for me. And psychic powers and the powers of neutral consciousness are just as dangerous in the hands of fear as any external powers are, have been, and could be. Do not kid yourself. When we talk about some of the stuff we're talking about here today, the NSA is small compared to the kind of fascistic uses this stuff could be put to. And so I think it's important that we be as morally sophisticated, as ethically sophisticated, as spiritually sophisticated as we are scientifically sophisticated. You know, when I was in college, I saw these posters. I think he was Scottish, artist Edward Burne-Jones. And he used to paint these huge angels, like 8-foot angels or 12-foot angels. And I used to have these posters in my room when I was in college. And I loved them. And years later, I was walking down the street in New York City, and I passed the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And the Metropolitan Museum of Art, sometimes has these huge panels out front showing you what they're having going on at the museum at that time. And it was a whole exhibit of the angels painted by Edward Burne-Jones. And I went in, I was so excited, and I listened. They have these little tapes now you can listen to explaining to you what all the art is about. And it was fascinating to me because I had already written in my book, Healing the Soul of America, I've been very interested in the Transcendentalists and very interested in Thoreau and in Emerson and all of those people. And I heard that day where these angels came from. Because with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, first in Britain and then in the United States at the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, there was this fascination, this mesmerization with the powers of the outer world, not that different than what's happening now with these powers of the inner world. And the world became mesmerized with what science could do, and this mechanistic, rationalistic, technological perspective. And everybody was so excited about it because of the same thing we're talking about here, how it would improve the world. But people like Whitman and Emerson and Thoreau and Edward Burne-Jones, artists, philosophers like that, were saying, whoa, 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 watch out here. If we become too mesmerized by the external powers, we will leave out of our thinking. We will leave out the importance of the internal world. And so Edward Burne-Jones had this line, and this is where he was coming from when he painted the angels. This is what he said: "Every time they build a machine, I will paint an angel." Well, of course, their worst fears did come true. And what happened, of course, in the 20th century was that we became fascinated by external worlds at the expense of a sense of moral and ethical responsibility. And that is why, despite the advances in technology, despite the advances in science, of course, the 20th century was the bloodiest century on record. Because, as everybody is well aware, certainly in a room like this, our technological power has outdistanced our spiritual understanding. Without love, none of it means anything. And without love, all of it can be dangerous. And so now when we talk about the powers of consciousness, when it is so important, it was a very interesting question that was asked. And somebody had mentioned just a few minutes ago about the idea of advanced meditators put into war-torn regions and how there is absolute scientific verification of the fact that conflict and the tensions and external tensions are reduced in the presence of enough advanced meditators. And we know that, those of us who meditate in our own personal lives know this. There's a diminishment of the tension and the violence inside our hearts. I remember during the run-up to the Iraq War how tragic it felt. And I think, in retrospect, indeed, it was tragic. The Transcendental Meditation Organization positing a plan to put advanced meditators in the Persian Gulf. And of course, while to people like us, this seemed like a fantastic idea, how poignant and how bittersweet and ultimately how tragic it is that we are at a point in the human race where we have evolved enough that there are those who know that this can be done, there are those who know that it should be done, and there are those who know how to do it. And yet we have not evolved culturally, mainstream understanding enough that this is what we would actually do. And that's true in so many areas, isn't it? Where if you're talking about the evolution and the elevation of consciousness in education, they're the people who know how to do this. If you're talking about the evolution of consciousness and the elevation of how we do it in business, in science, in the healing arts, in almost everything, there are people who are already doing it. IONS is an example of an organization that brings together the scientists who are already proving the way things can be done. And yet now, until and unless we join with the intentionality of the universe to do all of it in the service of greater love, then all of it, just like science in the 20th century, if you look at something like the atom bomb, look at something like nuclear power. Yes, you could look at some positive uses of nuclear power, but when you look at the negative uses of nuclear power, you look at the negative consequences of nuclear power when something goes wrong, then you recognize the profound moral irresponsibility of the human race, including one of its main proponents, the United States of America, in even allowing this stuff to exist among us. And so when we wake up in the morning, the question I don't think should be, how do I use the powers of my consciousness to get what I want? And when we say something like, oh no, I want to use it to better the world. Well, the question to me becomes, do we really think that's so easy? So that when someone made the comment, which I totally agree with, about the idea of advanced meditators, when that person then said, let's use artificial intelligence perhaps, robots perhaps, who could go and and put out and emanate the vibration of and frequency of peace in these places. My question to you, I'm not here saying that I have the answers, but you know you don't get any deep answers until you're asking deep questions. And I believe it's a very meaningful question. And I know what I personally believe the answer is for me. Certainly for you, the answer should be whatever it is for you. But I know the question should be asked. I don't personally believe necessarily that a robot can love the way I can. I do not personally believe that artificial intelligence has the conscience, the God-given conscience that I do. And that's why that movie, Ex Machina, is so profound. It is so profound because I bought it. I was fooled by it, and I don't want to give you away the end of the movie here, but the idea is that artificial intelligence could be so programmed and seem so sensitive that if someone says to you, well, they're not just manipulating you, you go, oh no, I mean, I talked to her, and she like totally gets it. I mean, I heard, man, you should have heard the things she was saying. I mean, she gets it. I trust this woman. She was programmed to make you think she did. That's the point. That's the deep questions that all of these things have. Now, in the Course in Miracles, there's a line where it says, I assure you, time and space are under my control. We seem to think, once I get money, I will use it in the service of the good. Once I get technological power, I will use it in the service of the good. And now, once I develop all these psychic abilities, once I develop all these powers of consciousness, I will use it to make the world a better place. I believe, from a spiritual perspective, the issue is the opposite. Commit your life on every single day to serving the purposes of love, and you'll be so psychic, and your consciousness will be so high, and technology and money and whatever you need will just accrue to you because there is a higher power for whom this is such small stuff. And so I think now, those of us who are already convinced that this stuff exists, just as ions and organizations like this, and all of us, if you're even here today, it's because you're already vibrating at the frequency of this collective field of understanding. But let's not keep this separate. You know, we talk about making the world a better place, like it's just, you know, this kind of like nice thing we could do. Can we talk for a moment about the stress points on this planet? We are the only species systematically destroying our own habitat. American democracy itself, the leading democracy in the world, theoretically, is being systematically dismantled in our lifetime. There are so many things happening. You know, not many years ago, but a few years ago, I went to the state of Wyoming. I think it's Wyoming, not Idaho. Sometimes I get Idaho and Wyoming mixed up. I think it was Wyoming. And back, I think, forgive me if you're from one of those, and I think it was in the 1980s, there were all these forest fires. And these fires, what happened that summer, changed the calculus of firefighting. And what happened was this. In professional firefighting, there's this concept of the acceptable burn, right? It gets up to a certain point, and up to a certain point, just let it burn. But what happened that summer was that there were too many otherwise considered acceptable burns happening at the same time, too close to each other. And that is what is happening on the planet today. We're like on the Titanic, the whole human race. That's why we all relate to the Titanic, not just because it was a good movie, but because it's an archetype that all of us understand deeply. We are on it, and we are headed for the iceberg, and we know it. The iceberg could be biochemical, the iceberg could be a terrorism phenomenon, the iceberg could be weather catastrophe, it could take so many different forms. The issue is not what form fear takes. The issue is that there now be a collective field of consciousness that interrupts the ship and turns it around. That is what is important. And the tools that we use, I do not believe, are as important as the intention, because the universe itself is intentional. Love is intentional. And just as that natural intelligence in every single cell, how does that cell know to collaborate with another cell to form a pancreas? And how does that cell, that natural intelligence by which not only does that embryo become the baby, that natural intelligence by which the acorn becomes an oak tree, that natural intelligence by which a bud becomes a blossom, that natural intelligence that keeps planets revolving around the sun, that natural intelligence is an imprint on all life. You and I, just as your heart is already programmed to beat, just as your lungs are already programmed to breathe, you and I are also programmed to rise to the highest level of creative manifestation possible in this lifetime, complete self-actualization, complete enlightenment. It's already there. But the difference between you and me and the acorn is that you and I can say, no, I don't want to. And that's what that malignant consciousness does. So we don't have to worry about the tools. The tools are already given. The embryo doesn't have to say, oh God, how am I going to do this? And the embryo also doesn't have to say, I will become a baby, I will become a baby, I will become a baby. The embryo just opens itself up to the forces of life. And as we just open ourselves up to the forces of life, to that natural intelligence by whatever name we call it, then we ourselves become channels through which some power operates. Yes, that other 90% of the brain. And yes, we are psychic when being psychic would help. But, the whole idea of being psychic, sometimes, from A Course in Miracles perspective, nothing of the material world is holy or unholy, except as prescribed by the purposes assigned to it by the human mind. And that's why I feel about these powers of psychic abilities. Yes, they can be used for good, but they can also be used. Man, I met this man at a Deepak Chopra party, and he was so amazing in his powers. And it was exciting, and it was also scary as all get out to me. Because there's no way that some of the people that I would least like to be using these powers aren't already on it. And so I think it's time for us not to be naive about any of this. As we wake up in the morning and say, where would love have me go? What would love have me do? What would love have me say, and to whom? Then that same natural intelligence, which leads cells to self-actualize and then collaborate with other cells in order to serve the healthy functioning of the organ and the organism of which they are part, occurs naturally. You and I will meet who we're supposed to meet. We will have the conversations that we are supposed to have. Things will unfold according to that natural intelligence because love is intentional. But let's not kid ourselves. There is no such thing as a neutral thought. The Course in Miracles says all thought creates form on some level. So when we are not consciously standing, this is why the whole psychic power thing is interesting and also morally neutral. Because if I'm so into the psychic, what's going to happen, the problem is the ego is very insidious and it's very sly. Anytime you're thinking about the past or thinking about the future, what are you missing? The present. And the present is where the real power lies. And the present is where the real love lies. So I don't know about the powers of consciousness, but I know that the highest consciousness is that I love somebody. And if we recognize that there is already a natural perfection in the universe, that the universe is intentional, that there is already a force. Somebody was asking me the other day, where is the destiny versus free will thing? And I said to him, well, from a spiritual perspective, we were destined to meet, but we are totally free what we do with this relationship. And so the Course in Miracles would indicate you and I are going to become enlightened, just like that embryo is going to become the baby and the acorn is going to become the oak tree. You and I will become enlightened. That is the intentionality of the universe. Sometimes in terms of our own personal development, we miscarry. Sometimes in terms of our own personal development, we abort. But we are all pregnant with this greater, higher version of ourselves. And the powers that will work through us to allow this to happen, whether they're psychic powers, psychological powers, psychic powers, technological powers, financial powers, whatever they are, will accrue to us naturally to the extent to which we place ourselves in a position of deep humility and deep service and simply say, dear, whatever we call it, please use me today. It sounds so simple, but to me, That principle, may I be used by the forces of love today to go where you would have me go, to do what you would have me do, to say what you would have me say, and to whom, by which I will naturally attract and collaborate with others who are on that same frequency, in order that together we form that field of consciousness, that conviction out of which miracles arise, that vertical power, not a horizontal power where you dumb down the message to get more people to agree with you, but that vertical power where you stand on what you know and what you believe, and you stand for love on earth, and you do it deeply, and you do it seriously, and you do it with conviction. That vertical axis, that conviction is a force multiplier, and it doesn't necessarily get everybody to agree with you. Hell, the majority has never meant anything. The majority didn't wake up one day and say, oh, let's free the slaves. Should we? The majority didn't wake up one day and say, oh, let's give women the right to vote. Society is always changed by a small group of people who usually considered outrageous radicals by the status quo of their time, who have a better idea. And that's how evolution works. And when a species gets to the point where its behavior is no longer adaptive for humans, for survival of that species, either a mutation occurs, which does not represent the majority, but whose behavior represents a sustainable option for the species. Either that occurs or the species goes extinct. We are now at a time as a human race where our collective behavior is maladaptive for the survival of our race. There are too many otherwise acceptable burns. And now what is emerging, what has been there always, but emerging as this mainstream trend, is a mutation consciousness. It is represented by the great avatars. It is represented by the great saints. It is represented by the great religious figures whose message is simply that we love each other. And when anybody, whether it's in education, you stand for what love can do. In business, you stand for what love can do. In science, you stand for what love can do. In politics, you stand for what love can do. In medicine, you stand for what love can do. We form a collective field of a mutation consciousness so great it will interrupt the trajectory by which otherwise humanity continues in its trip towards that iceberg. We will turn this thing around, not because we had this ability or that ability, but because we loved. And from that place, we will be so psychic and such higher consciousness, it won't just be magic, it will be a miracle. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I will see some of you at my workshop later. Thank you.